Welcome to Between Authors. I am your host, author Adrian Lopez. If you enjoyed this episode today, don't forget to leave a like below and leave a comment for us. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications so you don't miss all the amazing authors coming up. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that author or book that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt as a reader. The goal for my podcast is to bring to you those authors or books that you may never have found that may have been the treasure you've been searching for all along. Today in episode 23, I bring to you author Jessica Foster. We're going to discover a little more about her, what she's worked on, what she's planning to work on, and maybe what her goals are for the future. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Hi.
Happy to have you here today.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Why don't you give the viewers a little introduction to you?
Sure. So I am actually a middle school English teacher from Michigan. And I've always had just a huge passion for reading. And I think that has just in recent years sort of translated into writing now too. And I just endeavor to write for my own pleasure most of the time. And then occasionally I think, oh, hey, I have this full-length novel and maybe other people might enjoy that too. So not everything I've written is necessarily something that I share with others, but the ones that I have gone through the process of taking a look at editorially for potentially publishing are definitely near and dear to my heart. And they express a lot of young adult themes that I feel like are really important.
Yeah, it's very interesting. As I've been doing this podcast, there's a very common thread of a lot of teachers that are actually authors. It's not surprising. I mean, because again, as a teacher, you're sharing, you're passing on knowledge, and I can see where the correlation is there. But it's very interesting how many authors I've actually interviewed that are actually teachers as their normal day job, right? Their normal profession.
I mean, we already have that skill set, right? Like we are doggedly determined in general. So it translates well into, not giving up on a manuscript, I think.
Yeah, extremely interesting because I actually originally had planned on being a math teacher. It's something I've thought about the whole way through and then just switched, right? I switched to accounting and then I switched to business and then just went a different direction.
Yeah.
But I do understand that. I can see the correlation there. Why don't you give a little bit of an idea of your influences? And that doesn't necessarily have to be authors and books. It can be anything that influences you creatively.
I think I am most highly influenced actually not by books, but rather by sort of media that I consume, videos, movies. I watch a lot of chick flicks. I am like a chick flick connoisseur. And I watch a lot of like adventure type things. And I really loved Julie and the Phantoms, and I can't believe there's only one season. But I watch a lot of like young adult things too. And I really just try to surround myself in media and the people that I know, and just every part of my life, I try to surround myself with positivity. And so I think that's probably like the biggest thing that I like to come through in my novels is just a sense of fun.
Yeah. Do you find that, do you find yourself reading the same genre as well? Or do you kind of venture a little bit in and out of there as well?
So it's funny that you say that because I joined a book club this year for the first time ever. I'm like, I'm going to become a book club person now. Well, I'm a middle child and I'm never very good at being told what to do in general. But it has really broadened my horizons to a lot of different genres that maybe I wouldn't have necessarily picked up when I was in a bookstore. But I do say that probably for my own, Kimber, sorry, probably for my own enjoyment, I read a lot of romance. I read a lot of young adult. And for my job, I read a lot of middle grade. So I feel like I can sort of successfully set my young adult in between like that middle grade and adult genre.
Mm-hmm.
But I like reading outside of my genre too, because then I feel like I'm pulling in other influences when I write. And so it's not all going to be sort of like the same regurgitated type thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too. I discussed this with another author. I don't remember which episode it was, but almost everything has multiple subcategories. So, even though you're in a genre, that genre can venture into mystery, it can venture into crime, it can venture into anything, right? So it sometimes kind of helps when you do read some of those other genres because it can fit within your genre as well. And like you said, it broadens your horizons and kind of gives
Yeah,
you those other little aspects of it into your genre.
I would agree with that 100%. Although I've been doing a lot of crying this year in this in this particular book club. Is the theme was your favorite book of 2022, but I didn't realize everybody's favorite book of 2022 made them just sob uncontrollably. But we'll get through it. We'll get through it together.
At least you have each other to get through it, right?
Right, right.
that's that's actually pretty good. Uh, um, let's talk about your book. Let's talk about Andy and the Extroverts. Why don't you give the viewers a little bit of a summary about what's the book about? And again, give us away as much or as little as you want to on that side of it.
Sure. So Andy and the Extroverts follows Andy, and she is a very introverted girl who has lost all of her friends and has sort of been chilling in that sort of middle space where nobody's mean to her, but nobody's including her in her high school years. And then she winds up at a leadership camp of all places, which is the last place she wants to be. And she is surrounded by everyone who is just like a communicator with a capital C and like very cheerleading and very like, yeah, you've got this. And she's like, I do not have this. And also, why are you talking to me? And so it's a bit of a comedy, but it also sort of delves into how she lost her friends and why she hasn't really been able to reach out to anyone. And she makes friends while she's at the camp, and it's like this really cool experience for her that it doesn't always have to be that way, and you can have people to rely on and not be an extrovert. It's okay. And then she also falls into a romance with one of the boys at camp, and it's kind of one of those volatile romances because she's never ever had any kind of romance, so she doesn't know what she's doing at all, and all of these girls at camp are warning her, no, you don't want to get involved with him, but they won't tell her why. And so the end of the book, you find out why, and then you find out whether or not they wind up together. But I won't ruin that part for those who haven't read it.
Do you have a favorite scene in this book?
I do. Okay, so my favorite scene is the first one I wrote, which is not the beginning of the book because I'm chaotic and I don't suggest this together like I did. It's a bit intense. But my favorite scene is the scene at the rock wall where Andy is sort of challenged to climb this 40-foot rock wall with, and all these girls are on belay for her, like, oh, you could do it, Andy. And she's like, you have no training whatsoever to keep me up here. And she's deathly afraid of heights. And during the scene, she has a full panic attack. And then Lucas, which is the love interest, is the only person who knows how to help her. And that was the first scene that I ever wrote. And it was just kind of like an incredibly emotional scene. And I wrote the entire novel around it. So that's my favorite one.
Nice. So do you find, or have you continued doing this, writing that way, writing out of sequence, or was that just how that story came about?
That's definitely how that story came about. And that was a story where I wrote about half the scenes in the novel and then shelved it for a year, thinking I'm never going to come back to this, but we'll put it in Google Drive and let it live there. Or, you know what I mean? And then I figured out about a year later, I was like, oh, what if I what if I unearth this and, oh, I know how to fix this. We just need to delete half of it. But, do I continue to write that way? Yes and no. Sometimes I'm kind of, I don't know, what's the word? Plantser. I'm half of a
Answer.
plotter and half of a, like half of a pantser.
Yeah.
Where I like to start with a bit of an outline. Like here's why this is bad for this character. Here's where this is going. But I don't like to finish it because I don't like to finish. Like, I don't want to know how it ends. I want it to happen organically as I'm writing. So
I mean, that's half the beauty of the story, is when you just let the story kind of go itself. So
yeah, I think the story at some point just kind of takes control and you're like, oh, this is how it's supposed to go. And it's not always how you think it's going to when you start writing it. Sometimes you write for discovery.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Again, most of the ones I've interviewed are somewhat of that half and half, right? The planter, because you do some plotting, but most of them don't do it sequentially, right? And I did the same thing. I started with an image that turned into a scene that led me to two other scenes that were completely separate, and just then I wrote everything and combined it together to say, how did I get from here to here? But it worked. It worked the way I think, it worked the way my brain works, and it worked for me, right? And I think from myself, and I don't know if it would be the same for you, that if I were to completely outline it, it would be too restricted, too rigid for me. And I think that's where I would have like the writer's block or something, because I would be forcing myself to fit it into something rather than coming as I go with the story and letting it go.
Yeah. And you don't want to suck the joy out of it either. Like, you don't want to suck the fun out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was interesting. We had there was one episode, and honestly, I've recorded so many I forget which is which. But there's one episode where we really came to the conclusion that the organic nature of a story is kind of like life in general, right? So in life in general, you have people that come in, that you meet, that you interact with, that are either for the good or the bad, right? And sometimes they're long term, sometimes they flash through. And it's those experiences that you grow from and you change your kind of like your life path, right? And we kind of really thought and said, it's kind of how writing a book works, because there's so many instances where somebody said, I had this character that was supposed to do this, and the character never left. They didn't want to leave. They're like, I'm planning to stay here, right? I'm a major character now. And they just kind of push their way into the story. Or something happened and your original complete story is gone because of something you wrote, and that experience changed it. And we really realized is that the story, organic growth of a story, is really just like life in general, right? Every experience and your reaction to that experience, or your response to that experience, really lends what your future would be. And it kind of happens in the story as well, right? It just kind of takes a life of its own sometimes as you write something in the moment and go, well, wait a minute, what has to happen now? And it completely changes where you were.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think, there's a lot of different paths too that we can take in life. And, you might have like a certain path like in mind, and then you get to that part of your life and you're like, that actually doesn't work for my specific like area of growth right now, like my character right now. And I feel like in the same way that happens in stories for characters that we write too.
Yeah. Did you have a hard scene in this book?
All right. So there is a scene toward the end of the novel where Andy goes to like the end of camp dance type of thing. And I think that was a hard scene for me to write because I wanted something specific out of that scene, but I knew that when people read it, they might not get it. And so it kind of like sat in the back of my brain a little bit, and like, ooh, I just know people are going to have words about this. Like, I just know people are going to be like, oh, I wish that it hadn't gone that way. But, like we were talking about, like for the character that I had written, it had to go that way. Because if it hadn't, it wouldn't have been true to the journey that she'd been on for that entire novel.
Yeah.
So, I had really planned on ending Andy and the Extroverts the way that a lot of people wanted me to. That was my original plan. And then it really just kind of took on a life of its own, and I got to a point where I was like, what would be more realistic and what would be truer to her character and what would be truer to the plot. And then I changed it. And to this day, if you go look on like Goodreads on like the reviews, it's about 50-50. Everyone's like, I love the way this ended. I hate it. Why would she do that? So you've just got to make that choice at some point as an author, I think, like what works best for your characters and just be true to them. So
yeah, I mean, honestly, it's one of the things I probably harp on way too much on this podcast is really your voice, right? And you just stick to your voice, and you're going to have those moments like you had where you say, I know they're not going to like this, but it's really where you felt that should have gone. And as you see, it's 50-50, but as you see, you do have people that love that voice, right? That absolutely agree with that voice. And that's always something that, I always mention on here for the younger writers or the ones that are trying to start out is stay with your voice, right? You will find the audience. It's not easy to find the audience, right? It's not easy to get your book out there, but just stay with it and be true to your voice, because then it's just so much more genuine to the story.
Yeah. And I think that that's really sort of important too, because I think during the publishing process, when people are querying, or however anyone's pronouncing that now, I think it's really easy to kind of get caught up in, oh, it must not be good enough because this agent doesn't want it or this publisher doesn't want it, or I must need to like overhaul the whole entire thing. But unless you're getting constructive feedback that hits the same notes each time from those industry professionals, a lot of times their no might be something more like, oh, I already have something like this coming out through publishing, or, oh, I already have someone on my list who writes similarly to this, or, oh, they might not be in the same place in their craft, but it's not the story that's the problem. So I think sometimes we get, I feel like, too down on ourselves as writers. Yeah. And I think that we all have very unique stories to tell and different paths to take. Like, some people may end up with big publishers. Some people may end up with small publishers. You might end up self-publishing, and all of those are very valid paths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, the whole process is interesting because a lot of people forget, and like you say, they get down on themselves right away. But you got to remember that basically you're presenting it to one person, right? And you have to catch that one person that either understands your voice, or like you said, it's something they're looking for, right? So it's not a rejection is not necessarily saying it doesn't work or it's bad. It's just not for that person, right? And a lot of people forget that is that you're presenting it to a person, right? And you're hoping that person understands your voice and is actually looking for what your voice is or what your story is. So there's too many people that get, and you understand it, but there's too many people that get down so quickly and think maybe it's their work that's not good. And it's not necessarily the case. I mean, it's just, you have to, if you're going traditional, you have to be patient, and you have to be I don't want to say thick-skinned, but you have to stand behind your voice, right? And really believe that what you did is good, because you put the work in. You put all the work in it, and you always have to remember it's one person that said no. Yeah, maybe they're the representative for the publishing house, but it's still one person that said no, and those one person's, you're never going to get 100% likes on anything you do, and you got to remember that is, don't let that definitely. Right?
I think too, like, there are moments in like publishing too where you're like, well, it's a great book, it's just not a great book for what's happening in publishing right now too. So like, in chasing trends, that's just a fruitless endeavor. Yeah. You just got to write like the book of your heart. And I have a lot of friends who may have queried like 100, 200 agents and publishing houses, and every single person, though they might have had full requests, all said no. But the books are phenomenal. It's, it's partially a game of like persistence.
Yeah, so it really is, right? And that's and it's hard. So it's hard for some people to go through that process, right? And that's why a lot of people go the self-publishing route to not have to wait, right? To not have to wait, not have to find it, and get your stuff out there. Because honestly, I mean, either way you go, you have to promote your own stuff. So it's not like
Oh
you're
yeah.
getting a lot of support for the publishing house as it is, right? You get a little more. They put you in more spots and opportunities,
Yeah.
but you're still basically on your own trying to sell it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the best person really too, I mean, maybe this is just an opinion, but I think one of the best people to really publicize your work is you, because you get it inside and out and you know how to pitch it. And I know that's a different skill set, but it's one that can be easily learned online. And as authors, we're really good at research. So, I mean, it's an extension. It can become very absorbing though. Like,
Yep.
how can I get my book out there? But then it kind of takes away from like whatever time you had reserved for writing the next book or revising a book and that type of thing. So finding the balance really is key.
Yeah, balance is important on that side. And
Yeah,
yeah,
let me
the
know if I ever
trends,
get there.
the trend part is very tricky. I come from a day job of designing furniture, designing indoor furniture, and trends or like a product life cycle. There's just so many different aspects, right? You have stuff that will last forever. You have stuff that has a wave to it where it gets very popular, then slows down, then comes back. And you have stuff that hits and is gone just as quickly as it hits, right? And trends in anything doesn't matter what it is, because I've done this for 20 some years in terms of furniture and stuff. Trends, fashion, anything, furniture, it's not worth following, right? You don't want to chase it, because usually by the time you get into it, most of them are gone or they're already coming down, right? And
Yeah.
it's generally the ones that last are the ones that slightly reinvent themselves as you go, right? So an item, again, it could be fashion or furniture or a story. The ones that really last are the ones that change, slightly evolve over time, because that's how it gets that life cycle to maintain, right? And if you start chasing trends, you're always going to be late. You're
Yeah.
never going to be on time. That's the problem.
5 steps behind, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you do any? I don't know if I asked this. I may have. Did you do any specific research for this book?
Yes and no. I did a little bit of research. I used to be a camp counselor. So I used to be a camp counselor for a leadership camp, actually. And so I kind of poured that sort of into there. So it's sort of like built-in research that life experience had taught me. But then also I had moments in my sort of like writing where I have a lot of like mental health background. And so I was able to write Andy in a certain way, but I also wanted to be true to people who maybe didn't have the same experiences I did. And so I was able to sort of pick the brain of some industry professionals on that before I wrote Andy, just to make sure that her experience would be a realistic one that she might have had at camp, because her introversion is so severe that a lot of the instances that she's thrown into, she has to have some sort of reaction. And sometimes the reaction was outward, but sometimes the reaction was internal and people couldn't understand what was happening to her. So I wanted to make everyone around her be kind of caricatures in a way so that they could set off her personality, but also be reacting to her in sort of a realistic way so that, she felt by the end of the novel, like she had grown, and that no one in the entire novel, I love about this novel that there is no bad guy in this novel, except for the expectations we put on ourselves. And so that was just kind of one of the things I thought, through the editing process, through going with my editor and my publisher, that really just turned out wonderfully by the time we were done with this book.
Nice. It is kind of interesting too. I mean, it's always the perceived fear almost is always worse than the actual thing that happens. And that's the thing. Yep. You put such an image out there of what could happen, what would happen, what's bound to happen, that sometimes it's so much worse than the actual. And that sometimes feeds into someone that is, not only introverted, but, phobias of certain situations. And so it's that fear of what you think is going to happen that's just sometimes so overblown in your mind because it's your mind feeding into it.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
Yeah. And then, it's a good point that you mentioned that you spoke to other ones in terms of the research, because it's the one thing that's just so very interesting, no matter what it is, right? And it's always best classified probably with like comics, right? With Marvel and DC, but there's somebody that knows a lot about something or anything, I would say. And if you don't put that little bit of effort to do that extra research, their reaction is going to be, oh, this makes no sense. This person
Yep.
would never have reacted that way. That's complete opposite of what happened. And it may be a small section in your book, but to that person, it's a big problem, right? And that's why, again, the research, and I always ask this question for that reason. The research sometimes is just that little extra spice or condiment in the story, but it's sometimes so important to the readers, because the readers are the ones that will unfortunately catch everything if you miss something
Yes, they
or
will.
oversee something.
So for a different book that I'm writing right now, or have written, right? I'm in the editing phase of it right now, the line editing. There's fencing in that book. Have I ever fenced in my life? I have not. And so I Googled everything that I could, you know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, so this is how this fencing scene is going to go. And I wrote the whole fencing scene. And then I actually took to Twitter, which I guess we're calling X now. I don't know. I took to Twitter and I was like, I need a fencing instructor. Twitter, do your thing. Find me a fencing instructor who will read this scene for me. And so I managed to find a fencing instructor at a private school, which is what is happening in this novel. They're at a private school with a fencing instructor. And I'm like, can you read these 5 pages for me and tell me what's wrong with it? This man for free just nicely picked apart my entire fencing scene and told me how ridiculous I was and what would happen instead. And I just am super grateful to him. Thanks, Chad. So it was just really like kind of a fun moment, because you're right. There is somebody who is an expert in literally everything that could be in your book, especially if it's contemporary fiction. Now, if you're making your own worlds up in fantasy, I guess you're that person, right? Like, as long as you're living by the rules of the thing that you've created, I guess you're fine, right?
Yeah, and that's its own thing in general. I mean,
Yeah.
world building in general, that's it's a lot of work. I haven't even tried to do that yet.
I'm solidly in contemporary for now, so.
Did you find this is your first published work? Did you find that the whole process of doing this, getting it published, did it change the way you write in any way? And it could be anywhere. It could be your process, your approach.
So I am just very, very privileged to have landed with Winding Road Stories Publishing. And I do think that they are very chill in general with what your writing process is. But when Andy and the Extroverts came out and we started talking, should it have a sequel or not? The process then was, if I submitted an outline and it was sort of approved, then I could write that book potentially for them. And it is set to come out this next summer, end of the summer now. But that was very new to me, because I was very used to writing half of an outline and then just kind of winging it. So I attempted to write this entire outline, right? So I was like, I will outline every single thing that happens, and I'm going to use Save the Cat, and I'm going to use How to Outline Your Novel, and I'm going to make sure it's like all perfect. And then I submitted it. And my publisher was like, is this a thing you normally do? And I'm like, no, it is not. Like, it is not a thing I normally do. And he's like, you could do what you do, And I'm like, oh, that was an option, because I'm such a rule follower, right? Like, that I'm just like, oh, I have to have it all. Like, I have to have it. And so as I was writing that sequel, of course, things changed and things had to be tweaked, and that type of thing as I was writing, because again, there's organic, matter to your story. So has it significantly changed how I write? I would love to say yes, but no. I am highly, though, aware of the fact that I use too much passive voice now after doing line edits. So I know I'm doing it, but I can't always see it. It's kind of like forest for the trees with me. Especially since I write in first person past tense. So I'm not like writing in present tense. And I try to do exercises with myself. Like if I just write this in present tense, I'll be able to see it. I still can't see it. I still have to do like Control F was like 8,000 wases. Like I'm like, great. Well, so, but my editor is continuing to work with me. She has the patience of a saint. So that's great.
That's great. So let's talk about you talked a little bit about it. So you are, like you said, you're in the editing process. Do you want to give a little bit of an idea of what that's about? And again, only give as much or as little as you'd like.
Sure. So like what the book is about?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I have 2 books coming out this year. The first one is not connected to Andy and the Extroverts. It's completely separate from that. It's called The Framing Game, and it's still YA, it's still contemporary, but this time it takes place at a prep school, and it's like an enemies to lovers type of a mystery. Where a girl has to basically enlist her ex-boyfriend to help her track down the person who's trying to get her expelled before she gets into Yale. And it's very like Scooby Gang meets like I don't know, meets Gilmore Girls meets I don't know, that type of thing, really. And so it's not as serious as it sounds. Like the problem is very serious to my main character. But again, trying to inject like just a ton of humor and like just antics. Like, oh no, we're trapped in a closet together. Oh no, we're above the stage together and he's so close to me type moments. So
I love the elevator pitch. It's Scooby versus with Gilmore Girls.
Yeah, it's like Scooby-Doo and Gilmore Girls. They're the worst. They're just like the absolute worst investigators that ever existed too. They're like, they really think they're doing a good job and like missing everything. So it's kind of fun. And there's some red herrings in there, but then there's also like actual clues. And I put it in front of some beta readers to see if they could figure out who it was. And I think 1 person out of 10 figured it out. And so I felt good about that. I was like, that's good. We're going to run with that then, because I don't want everyone to figure it out. I want them to get to the end and be like, oh, that tracks, but I didn't think of that, So it's a really fun one. And then the sequel to Andy and the Extroverts, which is currently called Andy in the Summer of Something, that comes out at the end of this coming summer/fall. And it follows Andy as she returns to summer camp, but this time as a counselor who has no idea what she's doing instead of a camper who doesn't want to be there. So still kind of a fish out of water moment. And then still romance, still friendship, still ridiculousness, just like in the very best summer way. But yeah.
Okay, and the first one you said is going to come out this year, by the end of 2023?
It'll be out in the winter.
Okay.
So hopefully by February, I'm thinking. It kind of depends on how line edits go. And we're currently at chapter 8 out of 40 on line edits. So I'm thinking February, maybe. So okay. Maybe January, maybe February. But I'm not too tied to a timeline because I just want to make the best book possible. And the publisher is very on board with that. So.
Okay. Future. Do you have any future goals of what you would like to do in writing? Maybe things you would like to tackle or take on?
So I'm just going to level with you. My goal in life is to someday retire and just write all the time, but that's a ways off for me. like a solid score off for me. Like we have multiple decades before that can happen. So, I can't quite like disappear into the woods as like a swamp witch yet. I would love.
You need Powerball help.
I do. I need Powerball help so badly. I love teaching currently. and I love writing, and I love them pretty much equally. And I'm having sort of just like this wonderful time raising my kids right now. They're very young, and I just love to watch them grow and thrive. And so I'm currently very happy with the trajectory of these 3 books. Am I always writing? Yes, I'm always writing. But I never take anything for granted. Like, I don't know which books will sell, which books my publisher might want, or what the future really holds. The only thing I can control and that I'm excited about is to just continue writing because it's fun. So,
yeah, absolutely. Do you ever think at some point you will try another genre, or do you think this is what you really enjoy, what you love, and you kind of stay within that?
I think right now I'm very, very happy with young adult contemporary humor, romance that tackles. I usually try to tackle like one somewhat serious issue in each of my books, but like with levity, right? I'm very happy with that like current trend in my writing. Do I have like random romantasy ideas tucked back in my like word processing that haven't seen the light of day? Yes. Can I ever see myself writing like a romantasy type thing? Oh, definitely. I'm definitely like a Sarah J. Maas fan. I'm definitely like all of the popular romantasy. I read them all. So I love it. I don't currently feel like the effort for world building works for me and my schedule. I think that it would be very labor intensive to create that world and take me probably multiple years. And right now I feel very comfortable in contemporary because that's kind of my world. So
Sounds good. I want to remind the viewers that I will leave all the links for Jessica's book below, and any, her website or socials, anything she wants to put down there. This episode, we're actually recording a little earlier, and will probably be airing in January, actually, which is why I asked the question, because then we could have possibly the link to your second book, that's available. But all the links will be down below. Definitely, again, if you enjoyed this episode, leave a comment for either Jessica or myself if you have any questions, or let us know things you enjoyed about the episode. And I really just want to thank you, Jessica, for coming on today. I really enjoyed this, enjoyed chatting with you and learning more about what you're working on and what you published. And definitely want to thank the viewers for watching as well.
And thank you so much for having me. It was definitely an honor. And thanks for being patient while my poor rescue puppy kind of flipped out in the background. I think there's some landscapers next door. So
no worries. She wanted to share about the books as well. So she was trying to add her part
so
about
into it.
But definitely thank you again, Jessica, for coming on. I really enjoyed this. And thank you, viewers, for watching as well. Goodbye.